healthy and happy new year to everybody. I'm glad you came to this first meeting that we're having. And as most of you know, Tammy, who was the president, resigned. And some of the board members met several times, and we decided that we would like to revamp Mid-Queens Community Council and start all over again and try and get more things done than we did the prior year, which we had accomplished a lot in the last 4 years. And but there are more things that we have to do. Okay, one of the first things on the agenda is that we have to tell you that the executive board picked myself as president, Elaine Young as vice president, Don Capaldi as second vice president, and Jeff Gottlieb as recording secretary, and Abe Fuchs as corresponding secretary. But it's open to the board if anybody else wants to partake.
We have not received a resignation letter from Barbara Baruch. Hence, we
No,
will
she,
remain-
as a matter of fact, Barbara Baruch called me today, and she's meeting up with me Thursday.
All right,
She'll
But
be
as of
meeting
now,
me
she's
in
the
my
treasurer.
office with all the books and,
all right.
okay, so
I'd like to,
not an issue.
I'd like to recommend the election of the executive committee, consisting of President Fisher, first vice president Elaine Young, who said it should be here, second vice president Don Capalbi, raise your hand, Don, there we are. Corresponding secretary Abe Fuchs, taking photos all over. I'm the recording secretary, and the treasurer Barbara Baruch. We're leaving in the founder Shirley Weinstein, but was also with some jobs, liaison with the exec, we forget about that. I'd like to not only nominate them, but to have them as to have a vote and having them as our new executive committee. Do I hear any other nominations? If there are no nominations, then you are elected. I cast one vote for the group, including yourself, Ms. Fisher.
Thank you very much, but Barbara Baruch's position as treasurer, I think she's.
It's temporary, but she has not given us her resignation
She
writing
hasn't
as
resigned, okay.
Tammy has.
Yes, Tammy has.
Okay, thank you. We move on.
Okay, as we move on. So we have a vision for the organization moving forward. I think, did you all get this meeting agenda? You all have this. So if you read it, you'll see these are the issues that we'd like to zero in on. And other things as well, such as services and paving of roads, garbage pickup, zoning issues, and empty stores. Okay? We want to be able to focus in on these issues that are very important to each of you who live within your communities. And unless you come to me or some executive person on the board and tell us what your issue is so that we can zero in on it, write letters to necessary people, then we're not gonna be able to move forward on the issue. And I think there are many issues in the communities that are not being addressed. And I think that's what this organization should be doing. Queens Civic Congress is a much larger organization, and we could partake in their organization, go to them when we have real issues in whom we represent in our organization.
We go by the agenda, Mr. Chairman,
Pardon me?
the agenda.
Yeah, so on the agenda we have, as you can read, the hotel motel constructions and issues, community policing explanation. I just wanna zero in on that because they had a town hall meeting and the mayor was there, and somebody brought up the issue of community policing. And he said that they will be doing it in all the communities in Queens.
I think they have it now in the 109th precinct, which is north of the expressway. They have community policing. They don't have it here. What is community policing? Don, you're up there.
There
That's
are,
north of the expressway.
There are officers that are assigned to, the precinct area has been broken up into sectors, and officers are assigned to a sector. And there are, in the case of the 109, there are 2 officers that lead the officers of that sector. And unless there's something particularly of import, the police staff stays within the sector, and the idea is that they know the community gets to know them, and there are meetings every so often within each sector for the community to attend, that are meetings that are led by the community
We don't have
officers.
it yet in the 107th.
107 is starting it.
Yeah,
I was just trying to look for the email. I'm part of it.
All right,
They
tell me
put my
about
name.
it.
I'm still waiting for them to provide information, but I know 107th is
That's
looking
the
to
area
start.
south of the expressway, the
Yeah.
area north of the expressway is 109.
I believe it's coming into every
Yeah.
precinct,
Yes.
and I believe 109 was the first.
Okay. Can we go into, we don't have anyone here to really talk about hotel motel construction initiatives.
Right.
There were 2 motels in the Fresh Meadows area that were one south of the expressway, one north of the expressway. Lawrence, you attended meetings about that.
No, I didn't.
No, you didn't.
not.
There were some motel problems that I think you attended a meeting on that one, am I correct?
No, I was never called in on it.
Was there any meetings concerning motels, troubles with people wandering around and difficulties?
Well, I know Jim Gallagher had brought it up as an issue, but whenever they had a meeting, they never called me in on it.
Alright,
So I was not aware of what was really
we'll
going
freeze
on.
that.
I think, the issue of those motels, that there were large demonstrations, had we been really organized,
Well,
we could have made, demonstrations and had signs and put pressure on the legislators, but because the organization was kind of defunct, it never happened. So that's why motels and hotels were able to build the way they did, because there was nobody out there really demonstrating. Hi.
Hey, get over here, find a seat, anyone?
Yes.
The
Yeah,
2
right
seats
here.
up here. 2 seats up here.
Down the rows. Thank you. We have Beverly McDermott here for Casino Park Civic Association, again, the 109th precinct. So we go for 109 north of the expressway, and she's bringing with Jim Driscoll, who's our expert
Sir,
on
you mind sitting up here?
the Flushing Remonstrance. Sounds like a science fiction movie, right? Beverly, how is it working up there, the community policing? Take a seat.
It's taking a while to take effect because there seems to be a misunderstanding within the community. A lot of people think that means you're going to have instant access to speak to an officer the minute something happens, and that's not how it works. And they're now learning how to communicate with them. They've given out their emails, their personal numbers, and we're able to determine areas that are hot spots, if you will, or problems that are, being repeated. So, one thing I will say, they do come to me and they tell me if there is a problem going on and what they want us to watch out for, which enables them to be more specific in what they're looking for. Right now, one of the big things they are concerned about is gangs, and they felt that the park was being used by gangs too.
So it's good, but you don't expect too much. Don't
We have
expect
to-
one
it
guy's
needs-
gonna
it
patrol
needs
the
to
whole
be-
area,
yeah.
and he's gonna come and, you could, yell at somebody, he's gonna run 4 blocks down to
Exactly,
you.
no, doesn't work that way. It needs some honing and getting used to. But I think the idea is the best that they've come up with in a long time, because it's similar to having the old-fashioned cop on the beat, where he knew all the kids that were good, he knew the kids that weren't so good, he knew which people had problems, and it's good for them to be familiar. And the old way was that every time you called to a different cop, where is this block? I don't know where the park is. How do you get in the park? And the park being the center of certain activity, it's important for them to be familiar with it. So I took them myself for about 2 hours around every path and byway,
Now, one of the big complaints we had at one of our previous meetings were bike lanes.
Yes.
Does anyone not like all these bike lanes? Can I have that a moment, please?
I hate them. And we have people working with us on our, if John Kelly, for those of you who've ever met John, he's very much in favor of it because his son is involved in, currently involved with creating new greenways. It isn't that I don't like bikes. I think I was always on a bike when I was a kid, and that's all I had to, the first 2 years I was married was a bike, so I love bikes. But nobody's taking into consideration that we have a population on 4 wheels that outnumbers them and how dangerous it is and how impossible they're making it for people to drive safely. There are a lot of issues. The big thing is people want them to be identified, licensed, and insured, because they can cause an accident the same as any vehicle.
Alan, you are the commercial strip leader. How do you feel about bike lanes going down the turnpike in your area?
Well, as everyone knows, the turnpike itself is very congested at many times. Putting a bike lane, don't get me wrong, I'm all for green and, reducing carbon footprint by driving as much as you can. But unfortunately, turnpike is not just used by residential, it's used by bus, public transportation and everything. Adding a bike lane will just narrow it down more and just make it tough.
It's not the right place for it. Definitely.
I ride a bike. I don't, and I've advocated for bike lanes before, but I don't think anybody's advocated for a bike lane down Union Turnpike.
Down Utopia, right? I
Down
think
Utopia has been
yes,
something
correct.
that people have asked for, yes.
Yes.
But again, when these proposals come up, the way that it works is they go to the community board makes a recommendation one way or the other, and then DOT assesses it. To my knowledge, so Utopia Parkway, I grew up on Utopia, right? I grew up right next to the park on Jewel Avenue, the playground, Utopia Playground. So the section south from the LIE is a little bit busier, I'll definitely say, but the section north of it may not be as busy at times.
Oh, it's busy. I have friends that live up there, and I can tell you it is busy. It's
I'm not
dangerous.
saying that it isn't. The question is, bike lanes are a tool, right? They're not everywhere. They shouldn't go every single place. But the question is, what are we getting out of it, right? So if we've had a street where people are constantly getting hit by cars, whether they're a pedestrian or a cyclist or other car drivers, there's a responsibility to fix that street and make sure that we do. And in fact, when we spoke, Beverly, I don't know if you remember, we spoke about the corner of Parsons and Rose, and we got that light installed there, right?
I got that light
Yeah,
installed, because
yeah.
I wouldn't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, and I see it myself when I drive, I see absolutely zero competency with people on these bikes. A lot of them are out there for exercise, so they're doing the slow pedal, which if they have to get out of anybody's way in low gear, they can't. They are not licensed, they don't pay for the roads in the sense that we do with our car taxes and all the things that we have to have insurance. If they cause an accident and drive away, you have no way of identifying that person. They should have to have the same as motorcycles. They should be licensed, insured. They should have to pass a test to see do they know what the rules of the road are, just like anybody who is using the road, any utility, any vehicle. If they want the respect that they feel they deserve, then they have to in turn do things by the book. And by the book means you will have to be identifiable, you will have to be responsible. And I do know that they will go after people. A friend of mine teaches at Queensborough, and he came to an intersection one day and it was extremely busy, it was extremely congested. So he took his bike up onto the sidewalk. He had no helmet on, to my knowledge, and he got ticketed because he was on the sidewalk to get out of this dangerous situation. And he had no defense. And this is a guy who's like super careful and like really nerdy to that point. and here he was trying to stay out of the line of fire, and he got a ticket for it.
I love Beverly. Alan, what is the biggest problem you have in the Union Turnpike Merchants Association? That's that's all the stores between St. John's University and about
176 to
195th Street.
193rd, yeah.
Right. What are the big problems there? What do you think what do you think is gonna propel you into a better state?
So I just recently stepped into this position, so I'm still acclimating in. Just the fact that we recently, opened a business on Union Turnpike, and my big mouth got me to where I am now, so. But personally, I mean, it's just congestion. I haven't had a chance to speak to the merchants yet, so I can't really give you.
Are there there's a lot of vacant stores or just very few, or they become vacant the next week, they're owned by someone or they're renting?
It's up and down, I guess. Like Iguanas still haven't opened yet. No one has occupied that spot. That gyro place right next to the Taekwondo martial arts store is now going to be a bar and grill that's going to open up soon. And then Cloud 9, where they were closed because of some problems, is now a Junkun bar. So it's reopening there. This turnover, the whole thing is, how do you sustain and how do you keep those business? I myself is starting to see the struggles and the obstacles. And that's why hoping, knowing, the community, working in the community, see how we could get the turnpike to start thriving a little bit, bringing more traffic, bringing other people from outside in. Now, of course, the more people you try to bring in, the more traffic it creates. And exactly, so it's a vicious circle. But at this point, I think one thing that you and Susan spoke up at the mayor's town hall was to pave Union Turnpike. That's one of the big problems right now. The potholes that are there, and the street from Utopia down to 188 is just horrific. So that's definitely one thing we should focus on to get that improved. And then
Will we
we'll
get a
work on
Barnes and
that.
Noble, or that's done with,
Yeah, I think
finished?
that's
Feeny.
No more
Yeah.
bookstores.
I'm disappointed.
No more
What can I
bookstores.
say?
Can I just jump in here for a minute?
Sure.
I didn't quite get your name.
Beverly McDermott.
Okay, I'm Florence Fisher. Okay.
Did you sign in,
The
Beverly?
issue of the bike lanes and the licensing, I think is excellent, okay? And the insurance issue is excellent. So I think as an organization, we should put a letter together and write, sign everybody's,
Absolutely.
organizational name to the letter and tell them how we feel about what's going on and what we feel is necessary for the communities when it comes to the bikes.
Yes.
I've seen bikes pass red lights all the time. And I think they should have the same rules and regulations as cars. I agree with
It's for
you
their own
100%.
safety as well, but they don't see it that way.
Pardon me?
I say it's for their own safety as well, but they seem to be, they think they're immune.
Because they've never been approached, they've never had to do what the cars have to do,
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
it's organizations like that would bring it to somebody in the political arena who would like to grab onto it and, become a hero. Okay, so, yes,
I
Don?
just wanted to mention, it was on the news today that bicycle accidents are up. Though, in all fairness, so was bike ownership. But I personally continue to see riders at night in dark clothes on a bike with
No
no reflector,
reflectors.
no light,
Yep.
and you can barely see them.
That's right.
Yeah, it's there needs to be rules and regulations for
Exactly.
bikes as well as they have for cars and taxi cabs and so on. And clothing is another issue which should be part of the letter, absolutely. And somebody in the legislature, I'm sure, will grab onto the issue.
Oh, I think
take it to
okay.
them.
And
They
that's
have to
what
take it
we're
to
all
them.
about.
Yeah,
That's
they
gonna be
have
one of
already.
the
The
things
thing
we
is,
wanna
like,
do, we have to
tickets-
take it to them.
Tickets are issued all the time for cyclists who cross red lights. I have a lot of friends who are cyclists.
And where is that, where are those occasions what location is that? Because
In
I've
Queens,
never.
I mean, I don't know because I always stop at red lights, so you're talking to the
But
wrong
you said
person. But
you've heard
yeah,
things,
but
but-
a lot of my friends who cross, especially the Queensboro Bridge, they know
Right,
on
well,
either side of that bridge is a major ticket trap.
As they should be, as they should be, for
Right,
everybody's safety.
if you break the law, you should expect to get ticketed for it.
So it should be
You know,
citywide.
I mean, but at the same time, I live in Hollis Hills now, so like I am always driving my car on Union Turnpike, and I always see cars making an illegal left turn on red onto the Clearview Expressway. I mean, I've never seen a ticket issued for that either. It's just that like there are things that go on in Eastern Queens that unfortunately don't
We have
get.
very unqualified people driving in large numbers.
But the issue there is that there is a law for a ticket for a car.
There is a
Makes
law
it
also
illegal.
for
But
cyclists.
there's no law
You have
on
to-
bicycles.
You have to follow the rules.
There is a law. It's
There
just
is.
that
Yeah, you
people
can't
don't.
ride on the sidewalk.
There is a law that you cannot ride on a sidewalk. Yeah.
On a bicycle?
If
It's
you
just
are,
you see it so often that you don't think
if you're
it is.
older than 14 years old and you're on a sidewalk, you are going to get a ticket. I mean, assuming a cop sees you and has the time to pull you over, but yes, that is actually a violation. Similarly,
We have to bring it forward, we have to bring it more to the front. That has become a bigger issue now, since they have all these bike lanes, which we never had before.
right, I mean,
Okay.
especially if there is a bike lane and somebody's riding on the sidewalk, that is weird, right? Because you
Like I
have
said-
an accommodation, you should be using it.
At my age, I wouldn't ride in the street at all, and I have 2 bikes, and I intend to get one primed up for the spring.
Uh,
I am not riding in the street, I'm gonna ride on the sidewalk, and they can ticket me all they want. And I will pay them, and I will go to court, and they can put me in jail. It's ridiculous. It is not safe in the street at all. I don't trust any of the drivers I see. As a pedestrian, I don't.
Right.
As a driver, I know they're gonna do the unexpected. They're gonna go through red lights and make turns when they go around cross the double line, make a U-turn where they shouldn't. Do it in an intersection. Those rules are not enforced at all.
Right, and I mean, that is the issue. There is an enforcement issue with
enough
traffic,
people.
not just with cyclists. It's just it's gotten to the point in New York City where people take the rules of the road as a, you know, that's a suggestion. You know, it's gotten to that
But
point.
one thing I just want to add is, my mom lives in Jackson Heights.
Yeah.
Jackson Heights has quite a few bike lanes, but they're more on secondary roads, not primary roads, which that kind of makes sense. And everyone does have reflectors and flashing lights. Helmets, I don't, it's half and half, but certain things are required, otherwise they get ticket. That area, a lot of people do rely on bicycle for transportation. And the police precinct may have ticketed enough and enforced the rule for the people to follow that, confirm, thank you. But over here, it's quiet.
Is that the 115th precinct?
115 or 100?
No, that's not, no, it's not.
Junction
Not
Boulevard,
even
Northern
close.
Boulevard, over there.
109
There's a
stops at
5
the LA.
definitely.
Pardon?
Where Junction Boulevard is and Northern Boulevard. That
I
whole
think
strip.
it's the 115th,
Yeah.
that's on
Yeah,
this.
it may be.
115.
It may be
Yeah, on
115,
Northern.
yes, yes, correct.
I just wanna address the merchant association, the empty stores that you were talking about. Is the landlord of those stores one landlord, or it's kind of broken up?
From Union Turnpike, there's strips of
Of
stores that
yeah.
are owned by different landlords. So the Carroll School Supply is owned by another landlord, and right where it ends and where it begins is the landlord that I rent from, down to where, I think Fortune, the restaurant, so there's different strips. And one thing I didn't mention is, I was just recently told that Ben Fur
Oh, yeah.
is moving or gone.
They closed,
Yes.
they closed?
Yes, yes.
Wow. You've been there a long time. I know, I bought a coat from them. Anyhow, that's my husband's one. But I think what we should do, I mean, I'd be willing to do that, is to sit down with the landlord of a specific strip, who owns a strip of store, and talk as to, I think one of the big issues is the amount of rents that they charge, which is a big issue. So I think having a dialogue with them would be very good.
Absolutely. What-
And you as a president, I would be very happy to come in and have
Sure.
this conversation.
Great, thank you. I know one of the biggest challenge when Wendy and Bob from Edward Jones and the previous president wanted to start a bid was to start conversations and dialogues with the landlords. A lot of the landlords there are, I call it old money, which is handed down from parents and is paid off, and they'll get a tax write-off whether they rent it or not, they really don't care. I mean, my rent is high as hell, but the only thing is convenience in the neighborhood that I am familiar with and the community I want to serve, that's why I went for that. There's nothing you could do. You know, it's been vacant, you guys know where Northern Appliance is and the smaller one right before that. It's been vacant for a while, and he'll leave it vacant, he don't care.
There's a gas station on Union Turnpike that's been vacant for 40 years.
Right, across from Carvel.
Right,
Oh, yeah.
because nobody wanted to go through the expense of lifting tanks underground.
Especially with EPA
And
now.
that's been an eyesore for a long time.
Have you ever
And then they
inquired-
started to build I don't know if it was going to be office, the orange building that's near the supermarket on Union Turnpike. It's been vacant for I don't know
Right,
how many
right,
years,
yeah.
which is another issue. So
It
those
looked like
are-
they started to, continue this construction there and then they stopped again.
So, I mean, we could talk to people.
By the way, do you know what's going into Carroll School Supply?
It's supposed to be a multi-use building that has a daycare on top, bookstore, not Barnes and Noble, bookstore on the bottom, and a few other commercial stores. I was
It's not
told
just
that-
one, business.
not just one business, correct?
Yeah, because they wanted to go up 3 stories and the community board knocked it down.
Yep. But believe it or not, supposedly they stopped construction because of whatever. I see the people going in and out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, they are continuing, and whatever they are planning to do, I would
But we have to
assume that
watch it.
absolutely, yes.
Florence, can I
Yes.
give a very brief report about the T building? Because something's been happening, it's been moving. The T building on the campus of Queens Hospital Center, where it is a 10-story building, Deco Moderne. It's a huge building, it sprawls out. And it's called T building because it was called Triborough building. And some people, it was basically built in the mid-teens, 1916, 17. There was buildings there to house people with tuberculosis. In 1939, before we had the miracle of penicillin or aureomycin or things that could combat tuberculosis, people felt that sunshine would do great for you. And because people feared to have square buildings, they felt that disease or germs were in the square buildings. You had buildings that looked like battleships, rounded, circular. You ever see the Midway movie where everything is circular in time? That's called Deco Moderne, right? So this building was like that. And it was constructed by not constructed, but the person who was the architect also did the Kennedy Center in Washington D.C. So this man was a tremendous architect.
Now, he did the Jefferson Memorial in Washington D.C. He was gone by the time the Kennedy
building,
Center.
it served its purpose, but then again, it wasn't needed after a while because you had tuberculosis was, limited to a tremendous. My aunt had tuberculosis in the late 30s. They put her up in Saranac Lake. It was
Right.
sunshine, it was fresh air. She recovered pretty well. But what happened was that as the years went on, it had several purposes or several uses for it. Some of which was medical, etc. And somewhere in the early 2000s, someone had the idea, let's take this building and make it into a senior residence, high end. So if you sold your house for $400,000, you could buy an apartment for $200,000. Margaret Tietz Center actually went ahead and got a lease from the city for $1, and they were gonna run a high end in the mid-2000s. At that point, a lot of structural tests were made on it. It is strong. There was, no matter what people said, like Kevin Forrest, I'm not gonna go into him, but whatever it is, it was a very strong building. The State Department of Insurance and the city department, which had jurisdiction over this, said that that building is good, it is solid. And so it was set up and sales were made, but something happened. In 2008, we know what happened in 2008. The whole economy began to decline. And so in 2009, Margaret Tietz gave up on it. And so you've had some ideas for it. One of the ideas was from an organization called Communal Life, which would change it into a hospital for people with diseases, which basically came from their lifestyles. And what happened was they said, all right, it's a beautiful building, let's tear it down. Let's tear it down and build a new building in its place. Well, a group of preservationists led by Florence Fisher and myself and several other people said, no, it's not going to be that way. It just so happened that two legislators, one of them a state assemblywoman, another a state senator, asked the community board leadership, their executive committee, to bring it up before the board to immediately do away with it. There was no message to the public. It wasn't on the agenda, and the preservation committee was not notified. So the board voted for it. One person voted against it, Susan Cleary, who felt, hey, that's a beautiful building, what are you doing? Oh, well, let's vote. The executive committee said we should do it, and the legislators recommended. This is all at the tip of the legislator's district. So was did. The next meeting, we came out in force, and we fought against it at the community board. They said, well, we voted on it, and I was ready to go, and I called up the borough president's office, and I said, this wasn't fair, this wasn't on the agenda, there was no ULURP proceeding, no notice to the public. And I got a hold of the counsel to the borough president. I said, this was wrong. It should have gone through a process. I said, you have tell me your opinion of it. My argument. He said, well, I don't give legal opinion. I said, you're counsel to the borough president. Of course you give a legal opinion. So the borough president looked the other way, etc. Then we went before the Queens Civic Congresses, myself and Jim Trent and others. And we fought it there, and they agreed with us it should be kept up, despite the presence of others who disagreed. And so you had that. And so it was left alone. But then Mr. Dunn came in, Mr. Harold Dunn, I think, and he said, we ought to use this building the mayor has a tremendous push for affordable housing. A large part of the apartments should be set up for affordable housing, the rest for patients, mental patients, as not transitional, but permanent housing for them in this site. A lot of people looked at it, they felt it was an idea. Dunn has a very good record in Brooklyn and Manhattan. You were there, you took a tour. And so they thought it would be a very good thing. We preservationists felt, leave the exterior alone. Interior, you can do whatever you want to do. You can split up into 2,300 different places, but leave it alone. One of the things which caught people's attention was the fact that Dunn does not use union labor. And this building was within 10 blocks of Local 3, IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. You don't mess with these guys. And the community board noted that. He said, there's no union workers, we're not happy about it. We also want protection for its exterior. There's a landmark site, small L. And so they looked at it, and Dunn went to work. They sat down with Local 3 people, and they worked out a deal where Local 3 people would work on the building. The first time we ever did that. First time. That's number one. Number two, they were going to give the community space for senior area, senior center, youth center, library, whatever it's going to be. They were going to give about 10,000 square feet for that. That was another thing that was done. And then, right, and then they went ahead, the community board looked at it, they said, okay, we agree with that, it looks good, let's keep it as such, you know, we'll, as long as you worked out a deal with Local 3, our neighbors, as long as you have a community space, which Susan Cleary is following up on it, as long as you're going to keep the exterior landmark, small L, we can't get a landmark status on landmarks preservation, because the state said that you're landmark. We had a covenant on that, all right. So we have that, everything went ahead and it stopped. So a month ago, I spoke to Rory Lansman, the city council. I said, Rory, what's going on? So, well, the mayor isn't pushing it or anything like that. Very recently, the city council looked into it without many people knowing about it. And the push was on, and the city council voted to accept what the community board accepted, which was Dunn's proposal with the idea of the 10,000 square feet, with the idea of affordable housing and some part of it going to mental patients. And I've seen mental patients in permanent housing. They do pretty well there. They have people helping them out. I've seen it, because Morty Podman at one point was head of the health committee of the city council. I was his chief of staff, and I used to go around, you know, looking at things. So it looks pretty good. Some people in Parkway Village don't like the fact that, you know, you're going to have mental patients, you got people wondering, but they're very good at security. Very, very good at security. He answered a lot of questions dealing with that. And the exterior. They went ahead with the city council voted on. I spoke to I spoke to a person on the staff of Rory Lansman today. They said they voted on it. It looks good. The exterior will remain the same, which is fine. Now tomorrow, the chair of the community board, Martha, was going to go ahead and she's going to give a statement dealing with that, what's going on with that thing. You may want to give her a call. You had a buildings committee, if I think? Is that your thing? All right. As a buildings committee chairman, I called up Department of City Planning today. I said, you guys approving it? No, we don't know anything about this. We don't know. I said, you're city planning. They said, we don't know. It just went around us, you know what I mean? And so we had that. So I think that tomorrow you might want to make a call to Martha Taylor, and I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to be at the meeting Wednesday night when she's going to make that statement. And I heard that the exterior will remain the same, which is good, but I don't trust anybody.
No, don't.
I'm going to keep my eyes open. Please,
The other
Lord.
issue
Well,
that
Florence, you
held
said
up
something?
the passing of allowing Martin Dunn to move forward was the Park Central Motel. That seemed to be a big problem for
Where's it
people
located?
who
Tell us.
live
Where's it
in
located?
Parkway Village. And
Parsons
so
and
we
the
met
Expressway.
with
And
the homeless, the people who represent the homeless. You wanna
Yeah.
take it?
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Go
I mean, Children's Community Services.
Yeah.
The head of that organization, Thomas Bransky. So, in that Park Central meeting, we met with him and with a woman from Department of Homeless Services named Amanda Naisner, who is responsible for shelters in this area and for community outreach for the shelters in this area. And he'll be speaking at the community board meeting tomorrow on Wednesday as well. I don't know if there's any specific question people have.
I'm not understanding what Park Central Motel has to do with the T building.
Well, it's not far from the T building, that's why, it's just on the other side of the Grand Central.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the location,
The
but
Parkway Village was concerned about that motel and the homeless people. There are 33 families in there that are homeless. And then they were concerned about the 22 people that they were going to be putting into the T building that were also homeless or not mentally well. So between the two,
are they
Parkway
coming from
Village
that, are they
was
gonna be,
fearful that they would be coming onto their property, destroying their property, doing all kinds of things. And so we had a meeting last week at Community Board 8, myself and Bright and Susan, with the people from the Department of Homeless Services, and they will be coming to Community Board 8 to speak about how they handle the situation at the Park Central. Because the big issue is that most people are not aware of how they handle homeless people who are in shelters or in motels. And so these people will come in and explain exactly what it is that they do, so that people become more knowledgeable, because people are fearful when they don't know. And I brought up the issue then of when the AIDS started. Everybody was very fearful. They weren't gonna send their children to school. They couldn't sit on the toilet. All these things because they weren't knowledgeable of how things work. So I asked Community Board 8 last month if they would bring these people to the floor and explain to the community board exactly how they work and how they oversee the Park Central, and that they have their own rules and regulations for those people. And it's all about the knowledge. We need to have knowledge before we get frightened. Okay? So that takes the T building. Thanks,
That
Brad.
takes care of that. We invited Jim Driscoll down here. He's a famous historian, and he's gonna tell us what the Flushing Lamonstrance was about. Tell us, what is it, Jim?
About a month ago, 2 months ago,
Yeah.
there was a meeting up at the Quaker Meeting House. And apparently they were trying to make the Quaker Meeting House and the Band House part of a federal park. And they wanted to basically make more out of the Flushing Monsters. And that was a document, I think it was signed in 1657, which may have been the first document in America, signed in America, which okayed the idea of freedom of religion. Okay, and it is important, very important.
What did Peter Stuyvesant try to do that brought on the Flushing Remonstrance?
Wow, Peter Stuyvesant was the governor of New York, and at that time, the Flushing was part of the New York. And Peter Stuyvesant basically didn't like Quakers. He didn't like people who were not the Dutch Reform was. So he didn't like Quakers, or he didn't like anybody. And he passed a rule saying you had to close your door to a Quaker. And in Flushing, 31 people, I think about 31 people held a meeting, and they signed the Flushing Remonstrance, which is, as I said, it was the first document that okayed the idea of freedom of religion. Okay, so it is, more people should know about it. And basically, what some people were trying to do was make it a federal park, or part of a federal park, meaning the Band House and the Quaker Meeting House. And they were trying to play off, I shouldn't say play off, but trying to make more of the Flushing Monsters, make it much better known than it is.
There's that connection, the connection being that the Quakers were the ones that were the most persecuted, but Stuyvesant was a military man, and he wanted everybody the same, the ranks should all fall under one category. He wasn't too keen on anybody else either, whether they were Jews or Presbyterian or whatever. He wanted Dutch reform all the way, this way he could be involved with the ministers and get them to be the puppets for him.
Yeah, so that's basically why the 31 people in Flushing signed the Flushing Monsters, and they were not Quakers. That's the important thing.
Yeah, that's
they were
very
not
important.
Quakers.
Yes.
They just believed in what we call freedom of religion, or separation of church and state. The important thing is that they were not Quakers.
Yeah, exactly.
And they presented it to Peter Stuyvesant.
I have to tell you, two of them were, because two of them were my relatives.
Oh, well, two.
The Townsends.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they became Quakers.
Oh, later on.
No, they were in transition. They got, the Townsend was put in jail for the same thing John Bound was.
Oh, yeah?
Only he paid his fine and said, screw you, I'm going out to Oyster Bay and create my own town. That's what he did.
Well, I just want to bring out, it wasn't done because they wanted
No.
to help the Quakers. It was done because they believed in freedom of religion.
Yeah.
So, 360th anniversary?
Yeah, well, I remember when they had the 350th
Yeah, that was
anniversary,
fun.
they had a
Yeah.
procession to some of the key churches in Flushing.
It was really nice.
And it was very nice.
In fact, Peter Stuyvesant's descendant was there.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
the spitting image.
Oh,
When she
Peter
walked in the
Stuyvesant?
door, was a descendant of Peter
Yeah.
Stuyvesant's, and if you're familiar with his profile, or if you've ever seen an etching of him, very distinctive. And as she walks in the door, I went, and she's gotta be a relative, and she said, well, I don't know if you guys want me to be here or not, I'm a direct descendant of Peter, and she really was. You didn't need any verification DNA on that, it was very obvious. She
But
was
are
very
they
nice.
having a celebration, or has it already passed, or?
I think it's already passed.
Yeah, they
It's already
haven't,
passed?
they really haven't done, there were a lot of people that came, descendants came from all over the world that were descendants, there's over 2,000 descendants. But John Bound did not sign that remonstrance. He was, at that time, still Church of England, his wife was a Quaker, and, he respected her religion and allowed them to meet in his house. But he did not get involved in signing that, and you've never seen anything as to why he didn't sign it, have you?
No, I had to,
I'm
there was
always
no
looking.
proof for or
Yeah,
against.
I'm always looking for
Whether
it.
he was for or against the Flushing Monsters.
He obviously let them meet in his house though, so.
Yeah, but it's basically a 3-year story. They issued the Flushing Monsters. Peter Stuyvesant really disagreed and cracked down
Challenging
on
the
it. He was
government.
thrown in jail.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, John Bound allowed his wife and her friends, he was not yet a Quaker, but she
Yeah.
was a Quaker, and
Yeah,
her
she
friends
was.
were Quakers, so he allowed them to use the Bound House.
Yes.
And that was about 3 years later. He was kicked out of the colony by our friend Peter.
Yeah.
And he went to Holland and he explained that he got his way, but by that time the English
Yeah.
came in and took over. I'm not, this move to make it a sort of a federal park is not nonsense, because Congresswoman Maine
So,
actually got a law passed by the Congress and signed by the president, saying that they would study, they
Yeah,
wouldn't
it's a
do it,
study,
they would
it's a
study.
study.
It's a
It's
study, but
under
they would,
consideration as a study. First they study it and then they have to consider it, and it'll take years, it'll take years. What was interesting though is that, the first meeting, it was very crowded.
yeah, it was.
And second meeting, now we're dwindling down to people who really care.
Yeah,
And the people who are really gonna give the time and attention to it. And that's why it's important to keep going to these meetings.
And it's so important that the federal government take an interest.
Yeah.
And I would like them to see, I
Some
would like to see
protection.
them make it a federal park.
So my suggestion would be that this organization write a letter
To support it. Yes,
to
I would
support the issue.
definitely, yes. They know that we're
Okay.
behind them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Florence, Asher came down here with a request for a street name change, code naming. Asher Ramsaran, tell us, who is this
Yeah.
Kali Sharon person?
Go ahead.
Well, firstly, thank you all for allowing me to speak. Thank you for Jeff especially. As I said before, my name is Ashok Ramsaran. I've been living in Queens for the last 50 years, originally from Guyana. My ancestors are from India. And I'm very actively involved in community functions, as well as many civic associations and service to the community. So recently, one of our own people from Guyana, name is Ramesh Kalicharan, having lived here almost 50 years, passed away earlier in December. And he was a real community advocate, an icon, a supporter, a pioneer. And I have some information which Jeff, we can share that. Biography of them. I have only 7 copies here, so I'm gonna have to share this. Okay, free.
Give one to the chair, and we'll mail out the rest.
And you can see that he has done a lot as a community person, being pioneering certain festivals. The first, what you call an annual parade approved by Claire Shulman way back when for a religious function, as well as being a mentor for many people in business, cultural activities, young people, and religious. He was one of the first to establish a Hindu mandir in Queens, 150th Street, by 87th Avenue. So when he passed away, it was quite a shock at such an early age. He did many, many things recognized by borough president, recognized by city council, recognized by Caribbean as well as by international organizations. So it is a tribute to him that we co-name, and this is my proposal as well as many, that the street where he lived and did his business, 169th Street, between Highland and Hillside, that one block be co-named, right on the 169th Street, be called Kalicharan Way or Kalicharan Street. And I think it's well-deserved tribute to someone who has done so much to make that part of the community part of Queens, representing close to 200,000 people from Guyana living in the Queens area. One of the largest immigrant population in terms of percentage. It will be the first person of Indian origin from Guyana for a street to be co-named. There was recently one that was named after a policeman from Guyana who was killed in the line of duty, but he was Afro-Guyana. The rationale, the justification for this is that it added to the diversity the culture, the strength of Queens, and he is one of the people who made the representation of the community so proud and so progressive. So we have a series of steps going on. I'm in communication with the city councilman from the area, Landsman. I'll be meeting with him next week and making this proposal and getting his support. Community Board 8, Marie Ovid and I will be meeting shortly, where we will be putting together a package. And then it goes to NYC DOT. That's the normal procedure. So it's taking its steps in the right way. Support. The elected official support we've gotten so far, David Weprin. In fact, David went to the wake and prepared a posthumous recognition proclamation recognizing this person in this the time of the wake, and presented to the widow. We have, of course, Councilmember Landsman. There are two people from Guyana who are in the State Assembly and State Senate. Alicia Hyman and Roxanne Prasad from representing Brooklyn. They're both on board with this. We have the Queensborough president. We will get an official recommendation tomorrow. In fact, Scott Stringer, controller, sent a letter of condolence to the family as well as the mayor when he passed away. So there's widespread support for this. We're getting the organizations to give letters of support, so we take it to DOT, as well as all the neighbors to sign the petition that it's okay. And so this is the process. We're going to ask other organizations such as Queens Civic Congress, so that we build up this kind of
I
support.
think you rate our support.
Yeah, have you gone to Community Board 8?
Not yet. That will be
You should
after,
It'll be, well, two things
After
have to be
Lansman.
done, it's, I recollect, because we did the Pope John Paul Way in Middleville, in Nazareth. The first thing, of course, is that community support, which is basically a petition to open down the block. They say it's a good idea. And of course, our support and the support of the Queens Civic Congress and going to the community board. But allied with that, running in the same course, we have to sit down with Rory Landsman to have him draw up legislation, have his legislative director from Manhattan come down, sit down with us, and have him draw up the legislation, which, it is legislation, which states that that street, which is 169th Street between Highland and Hillside Avenue, 2 blocks up from Hillside, should be co-named.
1 block.
And, 1 block, I'm sorry. And then, when that is done, when he draws up the legislation, it goes to the city council. And then it is voted on, normally, was if Rory wants it, if he wants it, and he will, it'll go through automatically. It might take a couple of months, it's not gonna be overnight. And then the mayor signs it into law, big ceremony, you're gonna be there and everyone's gonna be happy, et cetera, et cetera. When that is done, the law, now is the law, goes to the New York City Department of Transportation, and they must officially change the name of the street, draw up a street sign, et cetera, place it on there, saying Cali Charon Way or Cali Charon Street / 169th Street. So you don't lose 169th Street. People say, Cali Charon, I thought it was 169th. No, we don't have it. It's a code name. You've seen it. It happens all
usually the
time.
code-name is at the bottom
And
of the.
it's gonna take several months, yeah, it's gonna take several months, but as long as Rory's for it, I'm sure he will be. It goes to the city council, it goes through the legislative process, the mayor signs it into law, and then you have the big ceremony with all of his friends and relatives around, they're gonna unveil the street sign, you've seen that, comes down, it's
So
pretty good.
I have a meeting scheduled with Councilman Landsman next week.
Oh, good.
I'll present the package and then we'll proceed from there.
Do you need that letter prior to meeting with the
That's-
council person?
It will be helpful, but the petition,
I think we-
there are
he
many,
makes us
many
support,
steps to go,
Madam Chair.
but first is the council.
Yeah, we'll do a letter,
What?
we'll do a letter.
All right, fine, everyone agrees that it's worthwhile support?
Thank you,
It's done, we've just done it.
much
It's a
appreciated.
good thing.
Do you need anything in electronic mail? I can send it to you, or is that good enough? Jeff?
His achievements would be good.
Yeah, it's
It's
a
in that,
biography.
it's in the
Yeah.
biography.
Yeah, we
I'm gonna say if you-
That's
But is
passing
it,
around.
is it
Through this
digital?
bio, I
Do-
don't think you need to send anything electronically. This cover is
Plenty here.
pretty exhaustive, so.
No, do you have it digitally?
Yes.
Okay, if you could send it to Jeff or
All right.
to me or anyone.
Yeah, we'll get it done. Mr. Chairman, I have a question of one of the legislative reps. Senator Stavisky's representative. As you know, the governor recently proposed, and it became a fact, that all families who have an income of under X amount, $125,000, get a free CUNY and SUNY education.
Right.
Now, your boss is the ranking member, in other words, the
Yes.
top Democrat in the Higher Education Committee, which is, of course, Republican-controlled state senate, but she has a tremendous amount of power. How does she feel about that legislation? What is her take on it?
It was, the plan was taken from legislation she had originally introduced, and it was tweaked by the governor.
What is it exactly? What does it do?
It was 100,000, this semester, I think it's 110, and then 125 in 2 years will be the max. What it will allow for is, if once you get your TAP payment or any other scholarship, the state will then fill in the rest of the money.
Correct.
So after you've gotten all the scholarship money, if you still need more money, the state will fill in. If you don't get any of those awards, the state will pay fully for the tuition, not your fees, not your room and board if you're going to a SUNY school, because it's for CUNY or SUNY. And you have to graduate within 4 years of the program. If you don't graduate within 4 years,
Free tuition again, you see?
but if you don't graduate within the 4 years, it's the amount you received would then become like a no interest loan that you have to then pay back to the state. Additionally, for as many years as you receive it, if you've received it for 1 year, or 2 years, or up to 4 years, you then have to live in New York State for the equivalent amount of time, because we don't want to just like give the education and then lose a well-educated person to another state. So.
It's called the
Excelsior Scholarship, yes.
How much money is that, gonna cost?
And where's that coming from?
There was a budget line, it's our tax dollars, that's where it's coming from. And it was done instead of like expanding the TAP money, which is already there, which pays for a majority of the people who will cover tuition for a majority of students that are already there. It's really for like these middle income families who between like $50,000, $60,000 and $125,000 who don't qualify for the financial aid, who don't qualify for some of the programs out there to catch those families. And so they believe by keeping them in the state, eventually it will pay for itself in tax revenue.
Very good explanation. You're really on top of the issue. Thank you.
It's a good program.
Thank you, yeah.
Many kids who
There's some tweaks, again, like if you have like a learning disability, we give you a longer period, it's not the 4 years. The senator didn't have the 4-year cap in her bill, which they do here. One of the concepts that they did take was we wanted them to stay here, which is one of the things that was in the senator's original bill.
He also keeps so many kids in school rather than them dropping out because of money.
And there was a tremendous amount of people who, I don't have the exact numbers, but there were, at least in CUNY, not in SUNY, but in CUNY, who took advantage of that.
Is this open to anybody in a certain economic class, or is this open for American citizens versus illegal and undocumented?
If you are undocumented, you are not eligible for the scholarship.
Very good. Thank you.
You also have to be, you could be a legal immigrant resident here, but you would have had to lived in New York State for at least a year before.
Yeah, I'm just asking only because we're a sanctuary city status, or maybe becoming sanctuary state, so I'm wondering if any of that's gonna be waived because of that.
But, well, just like the TAP program, they're not eligible for that either.
Fine,
Yeah.
okay.
Have kids taken advantage of it?
So, yeah.
Is it open now? I mean.
Yeah, people started applying last August for this.
Oh, so
Jeff
this already
Cohen.
passed, is that what
There
you're
he is.
saying?
Yeah, it passed in the last
Okay.
budget. Yeah.
Jeff, you graduated Queens College. What was the tuition when you graduated? If you're-
Well, I got my master's there, I didn't go for
I know you
undergrad.
have it, but tell us about the tuition situation.
But I only took like 6 credits a semester. It came out to like $13,000 or $14,000 for my master's program, so it's affordable. Paid for it myself.
Yeah, my brother.
I
goes-
mean, I don't mean it like that. I mean, I was able to pay for it, you know, because it wasn't. I didn't have to take out
Don't be
loans.
ashamed of saying you paid for something. Most of them are trying to crib out of it. They don't wanna have to pay. They want what they want and they don't wanna pay for it.
My
So you
brother-
should-
I was able
You are
to.
an exception.
I was able not to take loans.
Make that
I
sense.
had the ability to not take.
My brother goes there now at, he's on scholarship, but I believe it's 5,400, for the year, is it? I think
Is
for
that,
the year.
is that 15 credits?
That's for 15 credits, yeah, for undergrad.
That's for a semester.
It's really not that
No,
bad.
for the
SUNY
year,
is
15.
One of the great worries of St. John's, I was at one of their community dialogue meetings, which is like the advisory board we're trying to set up, Jeff Rosenstock moves on this, and basically they were worried because if you were, Joe Shami, who's their inter-community relations person, vice president, said, if I was at Staten Island area and I was sending my kid to St. John's University, and the requirements for St. John's and Queens College are the same, in this SATs, basically, averages, SATs, everything. And if I had to pay $40,000 for St. John's education, I'd get it for free at local Queens College or the Brooklyn College or whatever. I know what I would do. But again, you'd have to have set up a certain average, you have to graduate in 4 years, you have to have you have to have standards that have to be set up. I think it's one of the things they insisted on. So, I'm not sure how it affects St. John's. They're gonna have a meeting later this month, and I'm gonna go to community dialogue. I'm gonna ask, how does it affect the student enrollment at St. John's?
Yeah.
When does this go into effect?
The Excelsior,
Yeah,
last August.
all right, so it is in effect
They
now.
had to increase the private cap, because that was one of the
Yeah.
issues the private colleges
Yeah,
had, was
they increased the what do you call it, the
But-
cap on what you can get for.
Hey. Do we
Hey, Rabbi Yo Schoenfeld, the rabbi of the synagogue, thank you so much.
Here at 8:30.
Oh, 8:30?
Yeah, there's also somebody parked in my spot.
Oh.
Somebody with a Jeep Compass?
Yeah, it's me.
Yeah, are you gonna be gone by,
We'll be done in about a half an hour, Rabbi.
No.
No.
I didn't know about 8:30, but,
Well, who arranged the spot with you? Who arranged this time with you?
oh, Leslie. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
No, so,
I don't know, well,
He's not too happy.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Yes.
All right, now, thank you for your impressions of this. I want to thank Gabe for having us set up this meeting. This whole thing, this whole evening, some place you go to, it costs you hundreds of dollars to rent out. It costs us 25 big bucks to rent out this room, which is a fantastic deal. Again, Abe, thank you so much. I laid out some money for use of the parking lot, but there was so many spaces here that we didn't need a parking lot to do it, And we laid out money for that, and I'm gonna give money to YCQ, Yeshiva of Central Queens, across the street.
And I wanna thank Jeff and Abe for all the work they did to get this meeting together.
Thank you.
All the calls that they made, all the paper that they did, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And we need to continue to do the work, okay?
Now, next
Because-
meeting, whether it's gonna be in a month, 2 months, I don't know, but one of the things we have to discuss is the Shirley Weinstein Community Service Award. The people from Agawam were supposed to come here, the driver was ill. And so the lady
So
who
the next
goes with
meeting.
him also wasn't feeling too well, and they wanted to vote on this by proxy. I said, no, you have to be down here at our next meeting to
We'll
discuss
take
that.
it to the next
With the
meeting.
next couple of meetings, Robbie Garrison
Ah.
is looking into this now. We have a mayoral commission looking into statues. And some of the statues are offensive to many people in this
That's a whole
city.
discussion.
And Robbie has an idea of one of the statues. I gave an article from Harper's Magazine to her. And hopefully, when the mayor comes by, the Parks Department doesn't want to change anything. They gave that, I spoke to Jonathan Kuhn, who's head of antiquities. He said, we don't want to change, a lot of people want changes. There are certain statues which are offensive to many different people. And so, when we have our next meeting, Robbie will report as to the mayor's views on it, the mayoral commission, and she herself has the Old Flushing Town Hall. She's one of the executives, or were executives on
Old
that.
Town of Flushing burial
Old
ground.
Town of Flushing, right, Town Hall, which was a black and Indian burial ground.
Which,
She
for
was
those
an
of you
part
who
of it.
don't know about it, it's been accepted by state for the state registry of historical
Oh,
places.
great.
And recommended for national, so
Oh,
I'm very pleased with myself.
You should be. It's been a long time.
And the Lewis Howard Latimer House is also part. Lewis
Yeah.
Howard Latimer was a great scientist and a printer and et cetera, and did a great job. So again, we'll have a report on that on our next meeting.
I would like to throw it out to everybody. Would you like to have a meeting every 2 months, every month? What would you
The
feel?
Constitution calls for every 2 months, but we have a Shirley Wines, we may have a meeting next month, March, whatever. We'll work it out.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
One of the things I said to Abe when I walked up, he said, welcome
What?
back,
If we
and
want
I
to
said,
post
you know,
again, we
don't be
should
so
get out
sure.
on time.
We are?
Don't be what?
Okay, go
Don't be
ahead.
so
It's
sure.
8:30.
It doesn't help for anybody to attend meetings, just to attend meetings. Out of this today, we got a letter that's going to somebody for something important. And it seems to me, as I was listening, the other thing that's important to everybody is this bike thing. You mentioned that some politician will grab it up. Why does a politician have to grab it up? Why shouldn't that be something that this group takes to our local politicians, since it's such a big thing, the bike lanes?
It depends on who the local politician is. Some of them
Well,
are
no, they're not-
simply there in body only.
Yeah.
I wanna thank those who traveled a long way, including Beverly.
Wait a
Unless you
minute.
just go there.
We're talking
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Beverly, for coming. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Wait, hold on.
Oh, you have
Robbie's
something?
bringing up an issue.
Wants to
here.
finish.
Yeah,
let's have an issue, yeah.
it just needs to be something you talked about, but if it's of real interest, which it seemed that it was, as I was listening, is that going to be something that this group is going to take on? Because the bike lanes affect so many people?
I've never spoken to my councilman because he doesn't really speak that much English, and when he does, he says the same line like a recording. Can't get through to him, but his helper in his office, his assistant, Scott, is very good. And I've told him how we feel about the bike lanes, and he said, yes, we know it's an issue, but he didn't say what side they would be taking, or would they be investigating, opening up the issue to the public. I'll approach him again and see if I can get more from him, but it's very difficult.
Wherever
Yeah.
feasible, we'll get letters out to
Yeah.
whatever appropriate
And
channel
some of
or
us
agency
could
or
meet with
politician.
him. We could set up a meeting and meet with him.
And
See,
just so
the
you guys
purpose
know,
of this
before,
organization that I see is that if somebody has an issue in their community, we should be there to support your issue, provided that we agree with you, okay? And then we set up the meetings with the legislator in your community, who represents your community, and we kind of put their feet to the fire about the issue. That's how I see this organization should be running.
Do you have a meeting planned for March, Jeff? Do you have a meeting planned for March?
Or do you have months?
We can.
We have,
Well, what I would
our
suggest,
next meeting,
if
according
you-
to our Constitution, should be 2 months hence,
2
which
months.
would make it in March, maybe the
Right.
weather will be more favorable.
Uh,
Florence, you'll work with Abe,
Yeah.
as to when you want the meeting to be, and Abe will get this room again.
Well, if, what I was gonna suggest, I don't know if it's out of the ballpark, but the Casino Park Civic will be having a meeting either in March or April. And we have a very big meeting space, and I'd be happy to invite you to that meeting and open up this
Thank you, I
issue.
appreciate it. Holly
of the-
Civic was supposed to be here, they invited us to all their meetings.
'Cause we've
That's the
discussed it
Civic near
before.
Flushing Hospital.
Yeah, no, we've discussed it before, Joby came and it was it was a good discussion, there was a lot of information, but now it's getting a little ugly, and I think it really should be discussed, on a wider plane, so, I'd be glad to invite you all to our meeting,
Thank you.
and then
Thank you,
you can
Beverly.
have it there, and hopefully
Absolutely.
we can
But it was very helpful, we never had a Korean War memorial, and we have now one in Casino Park. And Beverly kept us on the straight and narrow because there's a grove there, almost like a sacred grove, that Mr. Samuel Bound Parsons planted maybe 150 years ago. And so we had a lot of issues, and she helped us work on it, and we have a beautiful memorial
Yeah, it is
to
lovely.
the Korean War veterans.
The only one in the city.
That's right.
It's the only one in the city.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Healthy and happy new year again.
Rabbi's party.
And I wanna see you all tomorrow.